storage, we're going to run into many of the same issues as the Italians, although the French are going to be known more for their large chests than what we see in Italy. And what we're seeing here is a chest on stand. So it's a chest that appears to have legs. Now, as the French Renaissance progressed, more furniture was added and furniture became more elaborate and more massive. In this form, we see a classical Greek or Roman column as the leg, with a stylized bun foot, as we see here, almost a double bun foot. And when you look at the top, we have this very Romanesque arch, as well as the Romanesque round window, something that we see in their architecture. On these pilasters coming down, we have a series of acanthus, as well as some other sort of fabric work going on here. Now, this whole chest would have been intentionally decorative. It becomes a status symbol. And this isn't necessarily a chest for a woman. This could be for anyone in the house, but it's basically a storage unit. Remember, closets are not something that we tend to see a lot of, at least not at this point in history. Now, as we move on to a chest on platform, which you'll see we've got that solid back to the lower level and the appearance of a solid platform underneath it. What we see is a chest that is ornamented, in this case, with masks on the upper section. The lower section, we have a mix. This is an arabesque decoration in the form of legs. And you see multiple faces here, one in front and one to each side. At the top, we almost have the form of caryatids, although they appear a little bit as a mix between half figures and caryatids. They do appear a little clumsy here, and that does happen. You have furniture makers who in some cases are a little bit clumsy with their sculpture, but in other cases it's the fact that no one gets that close to it from 6 feet away. As you see here, it looks stunning, so why worry too much about it? As you look at these pieces, you can start to tear apart the various decorative items, and they should all fit the motifs and forms of the period. You should also look at the material, and it should fit the general motifs of the period. But you can see here, you see how that carving looks clumsy. A lot of people will look at this and say, well, no, that must be reproduction. Actually, reproduction can frequently appear to be of higher quality than the original piece. And keep in mind, the most effective way of looking at any of these pieces would be to pull out a drawer or look inside, look at the methods of construction. Then we move into the cupboard. Now, the cupboard is basically a piece that is showing off material. It's also a piece that you would keep, for example, in a dining room or a dining space where you could keep your flatware and dishware. And it's put away, it's safe, but it's also going to allow for display, which is why we have oftentimes these large shelves. This would be meant to hold beautiful vases or other artistic pieces. The top would be flat and would serve the same purpose. You can show off the wealth that you have. And we see the armoire. Now, this one is heavily carved with a very vertical emphasis, drawing our eye up those vertical columns, very much like the Gothic cathedrals. Now, this is an interesting piece. The bun feet don't look big enough to hold the piece up. We see smaller upper proportions to the doors, so they look unusual. Oftentimes they will have some kind of pediment above them. So what we would be looking at in this period is oftentimes a pediment. And this is playing off of Greek and Roman temple design. And it would be a carved piece that would sit up top. Oftentimes it's a separate piece and is missing from many of these pieces. Now, these are flanked by human figures in the form of half figures or caryatids. And that is again showing off status because I can afford to hire someone who can create this rather than maybe a giant, simple rectangular box to call my armoire. But at this point, an armoire is no longer for armor. It's going to be for clothing, etc. And by the way, don't buy that armoire. It looks really horrible. We also see the armoire à deux corps, which is a 2-level armoire. It's clothing, once again. And so we have an upper level that is typically going to be smaller than the lower level. It gives you a very small sort of counter space, but it's not enough to actually make use of. This is all primarily storage. Up above, what you have is a purely decorative element. Actually, it blocks off any ability to display anything. And this decorative element is there, again, to show status or to give messages. For example, if I put the Virgin Mary here, it tells you something about my religiosity. As we move down, we see these massive carvings. So these are called partially in the round, as opposed to in the round in relief. In the round sculpture is like the David sculpture that's carved all the way around. Relief is still attached to the material that it's carved from. Partially in the round are pieces like this, which are so high relief that it looks like they're almost glued in place as a separate piece. All of this use of the human figure, this is all coming from the Italians at this point, from the Italian Renaissance, especially the use of the nude figure. So in Northern Europe, they don't like depicting the nude figure nearly as much as we see in Italy. And that kind of makes sense. Renaissance humanism as it exists in Italy really allows for the nude as depicting human potential. Whereas in Northern Europe, they're more interested in the textures and the textiles and what people are wearing. So we see a very different idea. We will also see cabinets. Now, the difference between a cupboard and a cabinet is that a cabinet has more doors, drawers, and frequently hidden spaces. So here, these doors open up, so there are 3 doors across. There are also drawers in it that open up. And then we have a large space underneath. The space underneath, again, is purely decorative. It's to show off what you have. Here we have round feet that seem to come off of these classical Doric columns. As we look at the top, we see it become more decorative and split into 3 sections. They balance out because the middle section, while it's low relief, is much larger than the 2 doors on either side in high relief. But again, we have these nude figures, which are symbolic of the Italian Renaissance influence on France at the time. Now, desks will be an issue as well. We've talked about desks in Italy, and we're going to talk about them here. As people become more literate, they want to write. They want a space where they can write letters, etc., back and forth, and we're going to see the development of desks. Now, unlike the Italians, the French desks will frequently become more ornate. They will also start to have more and more drawers and hiding spaces and everything else. And here we can pick out a few patterns that we've talked about. Here's our garde-roue pattern coming down off the edge of the desk. Here's a spindle, in this case, stretcher, a spindle stretcher or spindle legs, which means they've basically put a spiral into it, as if they've created sort of this helix form running around. This is a very difficult thing to do, and for that reason, it's highly decorative early on. We also see the use of ribbon and some what could be called strap work that we see carved into the wood. The ribbon work, almost acanthus-like here. I don't see the details. And pieces like this, a lot of people will look at them and see this light wood here and go, well, this wood means that this is a fairly new piece, but it doesn't. Wood does oxidize, but a drawer is constantly being scraped on the side, so you will see slightly fresher wood there. You're better off dating the piece by pulling out the drawer and seeing how the back is attached. Overall, again, it's a symbol of a literate society, the development of desks.